Chapter 7 will review the various topics of reform as covered in the guide. The topics include dimensional requirements, parking standards, allowable uses, street standards, accessory dwelling units, and development review processes. We are just going to review the items today that are categorized as short-term fixes. So these are the ones that you should be able to do with your existing staff without a consultant at minimal cost and really with full political support. These are not the issues that require more champions to implement. The dimensional requirements, a number of these we went over in the last chapter, but they largely include issues that have to do with non-conforming standards today. So the way development happened in your villages and towns and cities historically, with the bylaws that were overlaid over them in the mid-20th century, and the mismatch between the two. And really the big takeaway is simply to make the existing conditions legal. And this should be easily supported by all of your commissions, your elected officials, because there's very little resistance from the property owners when it has to do with just making their property conforming. So and then many of these issues, like we talked about already, they're at the absolute heart of providing greater affordability and actually greater housing density. Parking standards also we've discovered in great detail these three items already, but the big takeaway for this one is together parking standards may be the second biggest barrier to equity and inclusion as provided by zoning bylaws across the nation. They really are a very subtle but a very distinct way to drive up land values because it takes more area. And with this, it will exclude socioeconomic groups that don't have the resources for those greater costs. Allowable uses. Once again, this actually goes to both of the prior 2 points. It's a historic method to achieve exclusion. It likely is the single most effective zoning method for exclusion. It's essentially equal to redlining from the early 20th century. It limits housing choice. It limits housing density. It is really, if your community is making a concentrated effort toward eliminating systemic racism, this would be one of the primary tools that you would use. And it also goes hand in hand, of course, with increasing housing diversity, contextually correct densities, and appropriate uses in your village centers and downtowns. Street standards, we don't talk about that in great detail in the guide, simply because it's really a different topic having to do with transportation, other than the fact that with all of the on-street parking provided, it really goes a long way toward meeting your affordability needs, because and it's that issue that Mallory mentioned earlier about, if you do nothing else, do this. It's the biggest little thing. And so if you look at the parking capacity that is already on your streets and you use that to your advantage, and it allows you to increase housing density without requiring larger lots. there's a lot to be said about ADUs, and the two big items that you can likely do right away, one is to allow the owner to reside within the ADU and allow them to rent out the primary residence. The other is to increase the overall area permitted within ADUs, and both of these go hand in hand as critical solutions to aging in place. As the kids go away to college and the need for all those extra bedrooms diminishes, if the owners can move to the ADU, then they can rent out the larger residence for more income and allow them to stay at their home place. And maybe one of the largest issues that is rather hidden, that's a barrier to affordability, is the development review process. And we've talked already about the conditional use issues tied to discretionary site plan approval. The goal would be to simplify small-scale development application requirements and to define and permit limited deviations for specific reasons. And all of these are issues that complicate and make the application process time-consuming and, as a result, also expensive.